Making a game in 72 hours is a challenge, especially when you're just starting out. I'm going to talk to you about our process during those long 72 hours and show you what we came up with. Let's start with our team. I was the lead game designer, my fiance was the artist, a friend of mine was the programmer, and we found ourselves 3 music and sound people to join our team. And then we found out the reason they entered the jam had something to do with a course they were taking on music. So that was it, we had our team of 6. For those wondering, we decided to use Unity for the Ludum Dare 48 game jam. So we had to start where every game starts, an idea. We were locked into making a platformer before the game jam's theme was released due to only preparing for this game jam for about a month. We more or less had to choose a style and run with it to the best of our ability. Platformers were also generally one of the easier genres to start with, so for simplicity's sake, we decided no matter what the theme we got was, this game was going to be a platformer. We ended up getting very lucky with the theme. There was a list of themes that made it to the final voting round, but we were really hoping we would get a theme that was compatible with our plan. I'd say out of the 15 or so there might have been 3 or 4 that worked for a platformer and the rest of them didn't, so we really did get lucky there. The theme ended up being deeper and deeper, so as soon as we got the theme, we got to work thinking about what we were going to do. We ultimately settled on a 2D platformer that manipulates layers to add a mechanic that fit with the theme. So although the game was 2D, you manipulated 3D space to some degree. You had the ability to move deeper and backwards. Due to our restraints, we decided to make one large level. Initially, we planned on making a bunch of smaller levels that kind of attached into one another, but we just didn't have the time. We even came up with a little story bit to the whole game, so it had a reason. You were traveling deeper and deeper into the abyss to save your wife from eternal damnation. We even made sure that your wife was in the background, so as you got closer and closer, you would be approaching your wife in the distance. The original idea was a lot more polished than what we came up with. We sort of ran into a few problems. Our biggest restraint was the fact that our programmer only had the weekend to work on the project, so as of Monday we were pretty much on our own. So that meant we really only had 2 days to make all the systems we wanted instead of 3. We had some really good ideas though. We wanted to have platforms, disappearing platforms, falling platforms that created bridges of some sorts, climbable walls, spikes, checkpoints. There was a lot of stuff we came up with. Sadly, a lot of this did not make it into our final cut, because scope and 72 hours, right? Another problem we had was that awkward time frame between having a minimum viable product to design off of. As the designer, I had some paper designs. I even came up with a mock-up on Photoshop using the layers in that software to manage our level. However, after I was done those paper designs, I wanted to get started on creating the actual level in Unity, but until we had a working player that moved and jumped, or before I had the chance to manipulate those variables to give that character the right feeling that we were looking for, there wasn't a whole lot I was able to do. I ultimately settled on just helping the team in any way I found. So I plugged in the animations for the artist, I got everything working, resized properly, all the little stuff that would have taken anybody else a decent chunk of time to do, and since I had nothing to do, I figured, gotta make myself useful in some way, right? Despite all of that though, we only had a workable game in the final hours of day 2. So by the time I got a chance to really start designing the level, it was already too late. We had passed our time frame for the programmer. Any bugs or problems we run into going forward will likely not be fixed at this point. Some of these problems we managed to solve, but the majority of them, what we needed to make the game feel right, we were missing. We ended up scrapping almost all of our level mechanics, down to platforms that can move and platforms that could disappear. And the disappearing platforms didn't work. So ultimately I had a layer mechanic and a platform moving mechanic, and that's pretty much all I had to work with. The original level that I designed with all of these different layers intended checkpoints. The whole point was so you could just retry a section as many times as it took. But without the checkpoints being completed, it ended up making a very difficult level. Sadly, when it came to review time and people were checking out the game, there was a lot of people who never got to the finish because it was just too difficult. One mess up, you're sent right back to the beginning of the level. I also intended to have this small tutorial section in the very beginning, kind of like text on the wall, I guess you could say, just to explain the layer mechanic a little bit better so there wasn't as much confusion. But again, we tried to do that, the text wasn't working, it was getting blurry. We just didn't have time to add it. I ended up having to write the controls in the start menu, and it was kind of like a block of text in the bottom left. Wasn't ideal, but that's all we were able to do. We also didn't have a lot of time to play around with the control scheme, so in the final hours I realized that the controls weren't as good as they could have been. We ended up using Q and E to change the layers from forward and backwards, when we could have used W and S since we weren't using that for anything else, or we could have used left and right mouse buttons, we could have used a different spot on the keyboard altogether. Ended up being one of the more awkward things. I guess I'm so used to playing 3D games that Q and E made sense to me, but I think the saddest part about this whole process was once the game was done, because we were sitting there reading the comments and people loved the idea and they were having fun, but all of those things that we were supposed to add were the complaints that most people had. The control scheme, there wasn't checkpoints, you know, all the stuff that we intended originally. Everything was going wrong very fast, so we did what any team would do under this environment. We finished what we could and scrapped the rest. The 72 hours was just not quite long enough for us. If we would have had maybe one more day with the programmer, maybe most of this stuff would have been completed, but this sort of thing happens when you join a short game jam like that. With all of that being said though, I could probably speak for every member of our team. We were quite happy with what we managed to make. Did it have problems? Sure. But it was a workable game that has a start and a finish, and it was pretty fun too. What more can anyone ask for? Ultimately, our lack of experience caught up on us, but even so, we managed to submit our game. It was a very proud moment for all of us. Most importantly, we learned a lot from this experience. After all, game jams are really about learning. So down below I'll put our game jam entry link for anyone to check out, and as a side note, I will also be offering all the art used in our game jam free of charge over on Itch. I'll put a link below too. Feel free to use it any way you'd like, just give credit to our artist if you end up using it in your final product. Learning game development and design is an entire journey, and this video is one of my first steps to show you mine.